If you'd like help in growing your own YouTube channel faster, apply for one-on-one coaching with me using the link below.
That is a skill that transcends everything in life. If you can like move towards difficult tasks willingly and with like gusto, like I don't like writing. I like having written. I don't like going to the gym. I like having gone to the gym. I like who I am as a person. I like how I feel about myself having done the difficult thing. I do not like doing the difficult thing. And one of the things I tell myself, because I used to really struggle with discipline, is you don't have to like it, do it anyway.
Anthony is one of the coolest people I've met in recent times, annoyingly so. We connected through a mutual friend, they both do jiu-jitsu together, and then I started working with him on his YouTube channel. The man's story is absolutely remarkable. From being a 9th grade chess champion, to professional climber, to starting a window washing business and becoming a science fiction writer, and now, in his mid-30s, being rich AF, managing a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. In today's episode, we discuss reinventing yourself, approaching life from a multidisciplinary perspective, and tapping into your inner James Bond. Roll that intro.
Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Scentbird. Scentbird is this amazing subscription service for scents. Now, I've been a fan of things like cologne for a really long time, partially because the cinematography in a lot of cologne commercials has been amazing. So back in college, I would actually like make a playlist of like a Dolce & Gabbana ad that was in black and white during an Italian wedding or whatnot. And with a number of scents, I always had this idea that I wanted great colognes in my life, and when I was like this rich cool guy, I would have a bunch of suits and then a bunch of colognes. But of course, I was just a broke college student when I first got into them. And what I love about Scentbird now is that it's a way for me to test out new scents without really having to buy the full bottle, because a full bottle can be like 100, 200, sometimes even more. And yet Scentbird's subscription service, the first month is only $8.47, and then after that, it's only $16 a month. Super affordable. It's a place to begin or deepen your relationship with fragrances, to discover your style, to build your collection. It's also a place to express your individuality and gives each person the power to express themselves through fragrance. Smell is like a huge aspect of our association with memory and relationships. You know, you go to your mom's house, you get a smell of the cooking and you realize, oh, everything came back to me. You know, it's like a ratatouille moment. Based on your preferences, previous purchases, and quiz answers, Scentbird will also help you find fragrances. There's over 600 designer brands to choose from, brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace. But also, they have some of these like boutique brands that are like the scent snobs. Even they would like be like, oh, you guys have this in your collection? I can't pronounce a lot of these, but like Amouage, and then of course like Creed. Aventus Creed is considered like the top dog in terms of scents. I haven't actually tried Aventus Creed yet, but I think I'll add that to my list next time. My relationship with fragrance really comes down to style. I'm trying to like find the 30-year-old Nikhil version of my style. And I think to some people it might sound trite, but the right scent, it just feels like you finish an outfit. You just pull everything together, and it's something I really like. Plus, as a long-term goal, I want to actually book some of these brands like Prada or Dolce & Gabbana as a client. I know that's kind of reaching for the sky, but this is where I want to take my career, like making high-end commercials for brands like these. And so having fragrances like these in my life, or having these companies in my vicinity, it almost like reminds me of the goal. For this batch, the clones I received are Versace Eros, whose top notes are Ambroxan, Cedarwood, Geranium, and Green Apple. I actually like that one so much. It's a very like a date night kind of scent. I ended up buying the full bottle of that one afterwards. Another scent I got, which is also just a classic, is Dolce & Gabbana The One, whose top notes are amber, basil, cardamom, cedarwood, and coriander. Prada Luna Rosa, whose top notes are ambret, musk mallow, Ambroxan, bitter orange, clary sage, and lavender. This one's a little more floral and fruity, but it's still pretty cool. And Mercedes-Benz Man. This one was actually recommended to me. I didn't actually pick it outright. The folks at Scentbird sent it over to me. And its top notes are ambret, cedar leaf, geranium, oak moss, and palisander rosewood. Make sure to click the link below and use my code SINBAD for 55% off of your first month of Scentbird. That's actually only about $7 for your first month. Also, if you're a Canadian, I have exciting news. Scentbird is now available in Canada. Thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Now on with the episode.
it was in my early 20s, I really struggled because I thought I wanted to be Peter Pan. I wanted to be free of responsibility, and I just wanted to be out there doing my own thing, which is like what led me to rock climbing, because I could just sleep in the dirt and I can climb on rocks and nobody could tell me what to do. I was like just a dirty hippie. But what you realize at a certain point is you look back and you're like, wow, I have no value. I have no ability to carry a heavy load beyond my own weight. And that doesn't feel very good at a certain point, especially because I tried to marry a woman and I went to her parents. I was like, can I marry your daughter? And they're like,
you asked her parents?
Yeah, I went to her parents. I was like, can I marry?
Did you ask her first or the parents? Like,
I asked her parents first because I was trying to, like, I thought that was the thing that you do.
Traditional, so sweet.
And she actually, she appreciated that. Like, she was that type of person.
Yeah.
But I sat down and I remember her mom is like this really type A, high performing, high achieving person. And she looks at me and she goes, what are you going to do to provide for our daughter?
Damn.
And I was like, so that's a yes?
Yeah. You're like, so you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah. Okay. Door's still open. Cool. Didn't shut it down cold. Yeah. But it was that moment where I was like, what I thought I wanted was to be free of society's expectations, go do what I wanted over here and be Peter Pan. But then that moment, it made me feel like, holy crap, my life has had very little meaning and very little purpose. And, it wasn't like just pure freedom that I wanted. And I don't think people do want that. I think people want to be tied to something bigger and have a sense of purpose. And usually that means that you have to forfeit control in some capacity.
When did your purpose, people don't know you. Anthony is kind of like a new friend of mine. And what would you say is your origin story? Because when we first started talking, I was like, rock climbing, science fiction books.
Yeah.
And now it's like, I feel like your whole set of responsibilities is so different from that. But one of the first things I ever said to you was like, you do seem like a storyteller to me. So when did you feel like you tapped into purpose, and how did your origins begin?
That's a good question. I don't think there was like this, I talk about the moment of asking my fiance's parents. That was kind of a turning point because the first time that society's expectation of what it meant to be like a breadwinner or to like supply for the people around you, that was the first time it ever like really hit me. I also talk about how a year later my fiance left me, and that was also very pivotal because I think heartbreak and like the chaos that ensues from that can be, it can either destroy you or it can forge you. You can be, fire can, forge or destroy. And so that's one way to look at it. But I think the question of purpose is something that's continually evolving. And like what my purpose was when I was younger is very different than what it is now. And I assume as I go through another season in life, that's going to continue to change in the future. And so instead of just getting tied into one purpose or one identity, this is something I think a lot of us struggle with is like, how do you identify? Like, oh, am I a rock climber? Am I a science fiction writer? Am I a real estate investor? Am I a business person? Like there's so many identities, and you have to, as you go through life, be willing to like, let it go. Say, oh, this one no longer serves me. This is not who I am anymore. And it's really hard because the people in your life, they're not so quick to let those things go. So as you start to pivot and you're like, oh, I'm no longer rock climber, people still see you as rock climber, right? And for a much longer period of time than you've maybe moved on for years, but that's still who people think you are. And it's harder, I think, when you're like an alcoholic or you have like these negative identities that people associate with you. And it's like, how do I get away from that and become something new? How do I reforge myself? I
have always only ever identified as an actor. Like that for me, the origin story. I love how yours kind of, to me, from what I got of your narrative, it started with a fiance calling it off like that. I feel like that was the first chapter of the book. If we got like, obviously there's a bunch that came before that. Yeah. But that's like the first chapter of the book of this story, this particular narrative that I get from you. For me, it was like, I was in LA. It had been a year and a half at this point, and I felt like my first chapter was telling my parents, hey, despite everything you've done for me and everything you've said, I'm moving to Los Angeles to pursue acting. And it wasn't working. And I was in this acting workshop, and the guy was like, I know how you all feel. You think that if you don't become at least as famous as Tim Roth, or something, then this existential dread will consume you, and your life will have been nothing, and it'll be like this horrible thing. And I was like, oh, I completely agree with that. I'm like, you know what? That Tim Roth comparison was completely accurate. I got to be at least that's about as famous as I need to be.
Not too famous, not too not famous.
Yeah.
I'll be right in the middle.
I want to start with Tim Roth at least, and it, you know, it didn't happen, and I was like, oh. It was a brief blip in time, as superficial as it sounds, where I was like, oh, without this there is no purpose. And then I had to like let it all go, and I was like, could there be purpose despite wanting, you know, beyond wanting to be a successful actor? And it started like learning how to code, you know, going back and like learning something that a year ago Nikhil would have found so boring, and like, oh, it's like I'm entering the corporate world again. I got a $20 an hour job at Thomson Reuters, and it was utter failure, from like aspiring actor in LA to coming back to Minnesota and going down that path. But it almost felt like, wow, an exciting new story is unfolding. I found a new way forward by like tempering down and bringing it back into like, when I want to be an actor, what is it that I'm trying to make people feel? Is like, I'm like, what is the ultimate reason why I was chasing being an actor? I was like, I like making people feel like, I guess inspired is a very cheap way of putting it, but I like making people feel like, whoa. Like how I imagine it must feel to be like climbing up a mountain and being like looking off once in a while. You're like, what, you know?
Yeah, I wonder. It's the word that comes to mind is wonder.
Yeah.
Right? Like you make people feel wonder and like, wow, like getting outside themselves and seeing something larger, whether that's inspirational or horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, inspiration can come in a serial killer movie as 100%. Well, like that. I often love these detective movies because you see these people like at work in a dark universe. Like Prisoners is one of my favorite movies because Jake Gyllenhaal's character, he's just navigating this horrible world, and like the dark side of all human nature is what he's like dealing with. But you see a man at work, I find that inspiring too. Yeah. But I'm like, I guess this is what I'm ultimately chasing. I can just actually live out this purpose even if Hollywood rejects me. And that's how my channel started. It was honestly, it was like, this is like, okay, I can't make $100 million movie, but I can literally yell into the cell phone in a thunderstorm.
you play with the toys the gods give you, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's like, oh, I have a cell phone, and this is what I can do.
Yeah.
And I think that's empowering, is letting people know that they have the ability, regardless of where they are. But I'm curious for you, like, how old are you? You're
29.
29. Okay.
Almost 30.
So like, this is important to understand, is that like, I'm 38 now. That story of my fiance, I was like 28.
Oh yeah.
Right. So if you look at that and you're like, oh, it seems like that's kind of the start of your story.
I thought you were like 33, dude.
Right. I know. I look good. I get it. No. You know, it's all about the sunscreen.
Yeah, dude.
Especially with this
the
complexion.
haircuts and the James Bond jackets.
Yeah.
At all times.
I actually never wear sunscreen, so like I know what my future looks like. It's wrinkly, but
it's fine. Craggy.
But understand, like so for the last 10 years, you could use that inciting incident. The fiance leaving is like, okay, that's what made you who you are right now. But if I go back to who I was the day before she called me, and like the trajectory I was on in life at that moment and what I had tied my identity into, I was just as passionate about the things I was passionate about that moment. Right. So I was rock climbing, I was writing science fiction and fantasy novels, because I was like, off the back of my of her parents saying like, what are you going to do to provide for my daughter? I was like, this is a good indication of like how I viewed the world, and maybe like how out of touch I am with what's realistic, in air quotes, is I went home and I was like, okay, who makes a lot of money? And at the time I love reading. I love reading a lot. And so I looked around and I was like, well, Stephen King makes a lot of money. J.K. Rowling, she kind of makes a lot of money, right? She does pretty good. I was like, I'll do that. I'll be an author.
Damn.
I'll write science fiction and fantasy novels. And so that next day, I sat down and started writing. And I wrote every single day for the next 3 years, every single day, 3,000 words. And by the end of those 3 years, I'd published probably 6 or 7 novels. And so, like, one is like, you have to be stupid enough to think that you can do anything. I think like people who changed the world, they didn't know that they couldn't, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but like at that moment in my life when she left me, I was a writer. And so when I was in the back of the van, it was kind of like this almost romantic narrative.
Totally.
I could tell myself, like, as I'm crying myself to sleep at night, I'm like, this is all part of your story. Like, you're in the back of the van and you're super broke and you're a writer and you have your passion and whatever.
Yeah, totally.
And like, I stayed on that path, and that was the skill set that ultimately served me very well in life, but it wasn't in the way that I thought I was going to apply it. Right. Like, I have done well with my books, but the writing skills that I've learned have served me far, far better in other venues of business and real estate, or, what we do at the manufacturing company. And so for you as an actor, as like a storyteller, like that purpose, it might shift and manifest itself differently based off of how you choose to apply that skill in the future.
Luckily, storytelling is, it's like an ancestral deep. It's like I don't know why stories are so important to the human psychology, but if you can tell a good story, then somehow it's too powerful. You connect with too many people, you can make the sale, whatever it might be.
Well, that you go back to like our tribal days, like go way back. I'm very rooted in like the biology of what it means to be a human. Like we're fundamentally an animal, and we were an animal living out on the Sahara in the savannah for like hundreds of like unbelievable periods of time. And so we were forged in that fire. And I think the modern human likes to think we're very, very disconnected from our prehistoric selves. But if you really look at like the biology and the chemistry of what's happening inside of us and like how stories form, you realize like, oh, we're really just, we're just a blip in time beyond our prehistoric ancestors. And if you look at like the origin of story and the purpose that it served in uniting and sharing, disseminating information, because that's really what story is. Like the earliest stories were about things of like, where did we come from? Like, how do we survive? And whether or not you agree with different religious philosophies, those stories are rooted in a narrative that's designed to keep us alive, right? Like it was our ancestors saying, hey, by the way, like for whatever reason, when we sit out here and we worship to the rain god on this day, like good things happen. That probably has nothing to do with the fact that you actually communed with the rain god, but something else was happening in that moment. And so stories have just like ingrained themselves because they're easy to remember and they connect with us on an emotional level, and things that connect emotionally just get so much more deeply hardwired into our consciousness.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I love story.
No, yeah. The fact that you wrote 3,000 words a day for how many, like a long time, like
for 3 years.
3 years.
And then after that, like I started getting lazy, but I was still writing 1,000 words a day. And the theory was like, you've heard like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour rule. Guys, it's not accurate, but
oh yeah,
right. If you want to be a master, you have to put in 10,000 hours. It's been debunked, but it's a helpful framework. And when it comes to writing, as I was Googling, I was like, how long does it take to get good at writing? Because I was like, well, if I just do the thing enough, eventually it would be unrealistic for me to suck at it, right? I'll probably be good if I can just write enough. And so the thing that kept coming back was, you have to write about 1 million words before, you have to get 1 million crappy words out before you have any good words. And I was like, oh, I have to write 1 million words?
That doesn't seem right, yeah.
Well, in hindsight, I was like, maybe not too far off, but I was like, okay, well, if I have to write 1 million words, if I have to do my 10,000 hours, let's get those 10,000 hours in.
Yeah.
Let's do this thing. And so it didn't take that long, but I think when you operate with that framework of like, this is going to take a bit, and then just move maniacally towards that goal, you make a lot more progress than people realize you can make in a short period of time.
No wonder Anthony's got his own YouTube channel, and he's only just started kind of like taking it seriously, getting going on it. But I actually think your script writing is very strong, and this tells me why. I tell most people who like work with me to grow their YouTube channels and stuff, I'm like, if you learn how this game works, you are between 50 and 100 videos away from 100,000 subscribers. I feel like you're going to get to 100K subs. Like so enthusiastically, just because you've already, literally what you did with writing, being a YouTuber is being a writer. It's literally, it's the same thing. All the B-roll and all the creative flair, that is not the heart of what gets people to stick around for videos. It's crazy how in today's world, the ability to use language and communicate and use words, it might be the most powerful weapon there is.
100%.
Yeah,
absolutely agree.
It's not always the case, like my dad would, when I was 15, my dad would say, you need to learn science or whatever it was. It's like science is very important, but for whatever reason, the world has gotten to a place where the person who can have the best words will win.
I actually think that's always been the case. Think of like, what is the most influential thing in the world? And I would argue it's probably religion. And if you look back, say Christianity with the Bible, you have Islam with the Quran. As you go back, you're like, these are just words on a page.
Yeah.
This is just copywriting. This is really good storytelling. That's all this is.
It's kind of scary when you put it that way.
Right?
Yeah.
And from that, it has affected every human being on the planet in some degree, right? And then, okay, so that's the written word. And I'm a big fan of the written word for a lot of reasons. But then you look at the spoken word, and just in the last 100 years, you know, the impact, say, of Hitler. Like, a lot of people, I sometimes talk about public figures that people are like, oh, I don't know if
a lot of people think Hitler was a bad guy.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for the man. But he did a couple interesting things.
Yeah.
No, but he did some things. Like, if you think back on the World War II and like the effect that it's had on the world, it started with words. It started with his written word, and then it started with his spoken word.
So
and
true.
Like, the word can impact the world positively. It can do it negatively. Like, and you go way back again to our tribal days. Who was the most influential person in the tribe? It was probably somebody who could speak. It was probably the leader of the group who was able to communicate. And it wasn't like we think, oh, it was the big alpha male. It wasn't the strongest guy that led the pack. It was the guy who was able to bridge relationships and make connections between this person and this person and maintain that to organize the group to move forward. That only happens through communication, right? Like, to get humans to cooperate only happens through communication.
Yeah.
Whether that's body language, it's written, it's spoken. So I think it's easily the most important skill.
Damn. How has being a novelist and I guess gaining an appreciation for story, how has it applied to acquiring money, acquiring wealth? Your career is so different than what it was starting out. You've made some pretty substantial turns, but is there a through line between rock climbing, especially writing, and then now, like life and work today?
So with rock climbing, what's interesting is it's a really silly activity if you think about it. Like, we're intentionally finding convoluted ways to ascend a cliff. In a lot of cases, there's a far easier way. There's really no reason in any situation to like force ourselves to be there, but we're intentionally putting ourselves in the path of difficulty. And I think that is a skill that transcends everything in life. If you can like move towards difficult tasks willingly and with like gusto, that always serves. Rock climbing is also a very complex problem solving type of activity, because you're in real time living in flow trying to solve this puzzle that is a cliff. In a lot of cases, if you fail to solve it correctly, the consequences can be very high, depending on the scenario that you're in, right? And so those two things, facing difficulty and moving towards it intentionally, and then problem solving creatively, that works in everything that you do. So I'm writing books, because that's a difficult task. Like, I don't like writing. I like having written.
Yeah, totally.
I don't like going to the gym. I like having gone to the gym. I like who I am as a person. I like how I feel about myself having done the difficult thing. I do not like doing the difficult thing. All right. And one of the things I tell myself, because I used to really struggle with discipline, is you don't have to like it, do it anyway. And from that then to what we do on the real estate and investing and business side, if you can tell a compelling narrative, like around retirement and raising capital for real estate, those are dry concepts. And the reason a lot of people just kind of zone out when you start talking about these things is they know it's important, but it's packaged in a way that's just so not interesting. And so if you can tell an interesting narrative, which I think is something that we do at our company far, far better than a lot of our competitors, we can talk about these things in a way that people go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And they stay engaged. And then as a result, like, if they like you, they want to work with you. It's just simple business practice. People do business with people.
Yeah, totally. People also respond to the story when deciding to make a purchase.
Yeah.
I guess like working with you, they're investing in you. They have to believe your story. Like, yeah. And you have to, if retirement isn't compelling, what have you found compelling? Like what gets people curious and piqued?
When it comes to real estate, I think everybody has this real estate's kind of sexy in a lot of ways, in the sense that like everybody's had their life impacted by it. And when you look at big buildings and shiny buildings, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool and pretty. Like we can be in awe of it, again, like wonder. But a lot of people feel it's just so inaccessible. And so when you look at like a skyscraper, you immediately might think of like the Donald Trump of the world, like not a great person to always like have in your head as like the image popping in, but you know, like
just from an aesthetic point of view.
Yeah, you're like, oh, Cheeto. Oh.
Yeah.
But you look at these buildings and you're like, oh, it represents like a different type of life almost. And it's aspirational in a lot of ways, but it feels so cut off to most people. They're like, oh, I could never do that. I could never afford that. So they live in their apartment, they have their little single family home, and they're like, this is all I could afford. This is my reality. Yeah. And then as you start to open that door and say, you see that really cool building right there? You see that badass building that you walk by every day on your way to work? And you're like, you look at it and you're like, oh man, that's a cool building. You could own that. You could own a piece of that. And then suddenly, if you're owning buildings in your own backyard, like we buy out buildings in Minneapolis, it's super cool to be able to walk by your buildings in your neighborhood and be like, I'm a part of this. Like I own this thing. And it's a temporary thing in the grand scheme of things, but totally, I think there's something about real estate that is lasting for people, and they want to have like a thing that they can point to and be like, oh, I was a part of that.
I just invested $10,000 into my own like new coaching program for me. You know, we're all hiring coaches. We're working with coaches. Yep. And one of the first pieces of advice he told me is like, forget all the cars, forget all the watches. And I was like, oh, okay, well, those are my main interests.
Couldn't have told me that sooner.
Yeah. He's like, forget all this stuff. Yeah. The main thing is real estate. Yeah, get 100%. Into real estate. That's how you create a legacy. Yeah. Like, oh, it's so weird that you're like talking to me about, I feel like I'm in Game of Thrones or something. He's like, pursue legacy through real estate. Like acquire land. It's like
100%.
Yeah.
Well, because it's really interesting. One of the reasons the US has really thrived over the course of its 250 years of existence is because it has really identified property land ownership rights. If you look at third world countries that are really struggling, one of the reasons that they struggle is because they have no means of claiming land and then being able to prove like, this is mine. So somebody else can just come and take it. And land and real estate is the one thing that builds generational wealth because you only have so much of it. And so it's always an appreciating asset. And if you have a way of saying, this is mine, I own this, and the government then backs it up and defends you to say like, oh yeah, that's yours. Nobody can take this from you. Then you can pass it on to your family. And this is why like in the US, what we see is such a huge disparity in wealth between say white families and black families is because black families were very much over the last 150 years boxed out of owning real estate. And real estate as a means for generating generational wealth is the most powerful vehicle, and they hadn't have access to it. Even if that's just owning a single family home that then they could pass on to their family, because it's a built-in savings mechanism that they don't even realize. Like they're paying down their mortgage. Well, as that mortgage goes to zero, that's all just equity in the building. And the longer that building's there, the more it's appreciating because again, we can't make more land and there's always going to be more people. So it's a supply-demand disequilibrium, right? And so one of the easiest ways to solve for wealth inequality in third world countries that we've seen in South America, this work really well, is to make really rigid rules around, okay, you own this, and the government will defend your ownership of this. If the government's weak and doesn't have the ability to enforce that ownership, then all bets are off. Which is why third world countries typically really struggles, because they don't have stable governments that can enforce the laws. But real estate's at the core of it all. Regardless of if you're living in America and you're doing pretty well, you make $150,000 a year, like you have a good income, like if you don't have a way of retaining that wealth and passing it along, then it erodes. Like your money just sitting in a bank just erodes, right? Like inflation being at 8-9% this year, like that's a lot of erosion happening. And a lot of people in the middle class, so there's this like trite saying that the poor what is it? The poor spend, the middle class saves, the rich invest. Right? And it's a trite truism, because when you're poor, you can't save. You have all your money goes just towards surviving and spending. When you're in the middle class, you start saving and you put it in the bank account, but you don't start investing it yet, because depending on what kind of family you came from, like that probably wasn't taught to you. Like, what do I go invest in? But the wealthy families, like, why do the wealthy just keep getting wealthier? It's because they know the rules of the game, and they know the game is invest and then live off the proceeds of the investment, which is, when you can get to that place, it's like this flywheel that never stops.
Do you ever worry though? Like, this all sounds great. I fall into the first bracket currently, maybe slowly transitioning into the middle.
You getting those watches?
For a minute there, there's all this camera gear behind us. The entire first year of YouTube, I mean, my numbers were crazy. I said this on my channel before, but I think my first full year working with Thomas, I think the channel made $200,000, something like that. And I spent almost all of it on like making better videos. We'd take trips, like cameras and lenses. So I just literally put it all back into the videos, and no one else was doing it. Like, at some level, it was like, I don't have a brain for finance. I have a brain for just like, would this be a banger video? Is like how it works. But do you ever worry, like, you being so financially intelligent, if you ever have kids, they're gonna come into so much money. Do you ever worry that you're going to breed weakness? Like, you're going to be the king with the...
No, my seed is strong. No. So there's a couple of things here actually I want to unpack. Before, let's put a pin in that one. Because the conversation about like first year, 200,000, I spent it all, put it back into the business. I think this is important to talk about, because I believe, like, my whole shtick is that everybody should build a business and invest in real estate. And in the beginning, all of your time and energy should be going towards building the business, reinvesting into it, because that's where your highest ROI activity is, right? Your ability to go and take that $200,000 that you just generated from your business, put it back in and turn that into 2 million. You're not going to get those kind of returns in real estate, right? So you do that until you get to the point where you have excess money coming in, where you can't possibly keep reinvesting it back in, and now you have to start taking chips off the table and investing. And this is one of the things that we specialize in, is working with small business owners specifically who've been really good at building businesses, getting that cash flow, but now it's like their golden goose. It's the only place they have money coming in, and they don't have a means of disconnecting themselves from it without that thing falling apart. And so that's where real estate comes in, or just investing in general. So you start taking the proceeds, putting it over here. So now you get passive income that's starting to offset your business income. But that's down the road, right? Like, so for where you're at right now, you're still in growth mode. You're not in investing mode. I just did a video on this today. Is like one of the biggest issues for most new investors is they only have $1,000 to invest, or $10,000 to invest, or $100,000 to invest. Like, at that point, your biggest and highest use, right, of your money should just be investing back into yourself, acquire higher and more valuable skills so that you can increase your earning potential, which then you can invest in the future.
Oh, I see. Right. So I actually inadvertently did the right thing.
You're doing a good thing. Yeah, I'm trying to show some support here.
Thanks, bro.
You didn't completely fuck up. The watches, though.
I dropped the watches.
So to the question about my
your offspring,
my progeny. No, so it's interesting. My girlfriend, my partner, and I, we have no intentions of having kids.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so this isn't. Thankfully, it's not a question that I have to navigate, but it is a question that I think about a lot, which is the question of legacy. And I'm surrounded by people who are doing really well in life and they have kids, and this conversation comes up frequently because it's 2022 to be a male, or even to be a human who says I don't want to have kids is largely viewed as like, what's wrong with you? Like, you'll change your mind, but I'm nearly 40, so my mind's probably not going to change. So I think that money is a tool that you need to learn how to use. And if you don't know how to use it and I give it to you, you're just going to hurt yourself. And I think giving people money without making them work for it or understand how to use it does them no good, and in fact does them more damage. And then almost everybody that does not have money will disagree with that statement. They'll be like, no. I mean, if you gave me $1 million, I'd be cool. Like, but this is why people who win the lottery within 2 or 3 years are back to their original standard of living or worse, because they don't know how to handle the tool. And so the number one thing that, if you have a lot of money, if you have kids and you're navigating this, you should be teaching your kids what to do and how to use the tool, not giving them the tool. Like teach them how to go and make and get their own, because it's through that process of learning how to get it and then how to manage it that you understand what money really is. And this is something that everybody can learn. I know it's scary for a lot of people. It feels overwhelming, is why a lot of us, like for so long, for me at least, there's a reason why I didn't dive into it, because it felt like there's just too much. I was like, I'll never be able to understand all this. But then when you start to peel back the layers and you try to gain some kind of competency, you realize like, oh, this isn't that complicated. It's actually pretty basic, the number of things that you have to understand. But it's interesting that everybody's life is impacted in some way by money, right? Like the number one thing that stresses out families or tears up relationships is money, right? And yet so many people feel stupid asking about it, talking about it with their friends or family. Like if you went up to like one of your say medium friends at the gym, right? Like you just, somebody that you know that you pass by every day. Yeah. If you went up to them and you're like, how much money do you make? How much do you save? What do you invest in? How much do you invest in it? What's your net worth? Would you feel comfortable having that conversation?
No way.
Would they feel comfortable?
No, they'd hate me for it.
Isn't that the stupidest thing though? Like, why is that taboo? Why is that a weird thing? Like everybody understands that like money doesn't solve all your problems, but it solves all your money problems.
Yeah.
Right. And there's no reason that we shouldn't be talking about it, because everybody's life is negatively or positively impacted by it. So instead of suffering in silence, why don't we talk about it and have that conversation? Because for so many people, they tie money to status. Oh, you have money, therefore you're high status. And for a long time, that's what I did too. Yeah. And so that's what stops people who don't have money from asking about, hey, how's this work? Because they're like, I don't have money, I'm going to expose myself as not having money and low status. And if you can disconnect and realize like, one, money doesn't make you higher status or not, right? Like those are completely different things, different games entirely. And the only way to win the wealth game or to even like move forward in it is by learning how to play the game.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. So what is your definition of the money game versus the status game? You know, like what, it's hard for me to be motivated about money.
Yeah.
Outside of status. I think maybe it's because I'm still single, so I'm trying to use my money to like peacock harder.
Yeah.
But like, it's hard for me to like, I was talking to Thomas about this the other day. I'm like, it's hard to care about money for money's sake for me. Like I have to think about what, like, I'm like, what would you do with money? It's like, I just make doper videos or focus on making cool stuff. I'm like, yeah, I guess that's the only way to get emotional about acquiring it.
Yeah.
But then what is the money game? What is the status game? And what is your take on that?
So money is only interesting insofar as what you want it for, right? So the intention behind it is largely dictating if it's good or if it's bad. Like if you want to make money just so you can make doper and doper videos, because that's what fills you with joy and sparks your soul, and you're like, hells yeah, let's do that. I want money so I can do that thing. Like, cool. Like if you want money so that you can go and be higher status in people's minds and flex on them, well, the first scenario is because it's something that's pure to you and you're the judge inside of your own mind of like, oh, this is a cool use of my money. This is what I want to do. Like I'm going to make a dope video, and the dope video isn't predicated on how many people like and watch the video. At the end of it, before you post it, you thought it was dope.
Yes.
That's why you posted it. And so everything that comes after that is status game.
Yes.
Everything before that is wealth game. And it's based off of you versus external signaling. And the status game is zero sum. Wealth everybody can win. Like I know this is a concept that people will largely disagree with if they don't understand how wealth works, but everybody has the ability to be wealthy. And you can look no further to get proof of this than the fact that the standard of living across the globe right now is higher than it was 50 years ago, which is higher than it was 50 years before that for every human, right? Like to be ranked 7 billionth on the planet right now still probably puts you ahead of being ranked in the top 3,000, like 3,000 years ago. I'm reading the biography of Genghis Khan right now, and I'm like, I could not live. I would not live long. And so it's just, wealth is something that wealth begets more wealth. And so as we develop more technology, more means of like improving lives, Everybody can have that. And so me getting wealth isn't at the expense of you getting wealth. And this is where like the whole Occupy Wall Street 1% is evil and like wealthy people are bad is a false narrative, because it's like, well, no, me having wealth or you having wealth doesn't take away from somebody else having wealth, right? It's not, there's 100 pieces of gold to go around and that's it. It's an infinite game. Whereas status is inherently zero sum, which means in a hierarchy, there can only be number one and there can only be one number two, right? And for me to move from number 3 to number two has to move out.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can only ever move so far, and you moving means somebody else has to move out of the way.
Yep.
And so in general, I think to live a life of purpose and meaning and like wake up every day being psyched about what you're doing, don't play the hierarchy status game. Don't play the zero sum games. Play games that are infinite, that everybody can win. And that's what the wealth game really is. And then it allows you to, once you've won it, to focus on realizing your best self, right? And that's an internally derived motivation.
Yeah. It rings so true what you say. I think I'm too caught up in it. I think it's because the side of YouTube that I'm on is all about, it's status is king.
Yeah.
This is the side. Yeah. It's like, I've been listening to these ideas for so long that it became cellular on some of them. Like status is what it's all about.
I think part of it is who you surround yourself with and who you listen to. Like what's the narrative that you're allowing to come into you? And that's Instagram, YouTube, whoever. That's a very status driven world, right? And so if that's what you're hearing all the time, then of course that's going to be the ethos that you start to adopt. But one of the really, really interesting things, and I would not have realized this, is when I was in my 20s, I was like $80,000 in debt. I was playing the same game. Like I want a status. I want to be more. I want to peer it more, right? Because I feel empty inside. So at least if you think I'm more, like that's something at least, right? But as I like started to move up through the different ladders of wealth, what I started to see was people who are playing that game at a higher level than me, they don't play the status game in the way that people, lower on the ladder play it, like at all. It's really interesting. So I used to play it in the way that I thought wealthy people play it. They don't really play it that way. Like the watches and the cars and the houses and stuff, like that's part of it, but they're not flexing that stuff. It's just like when you have so much money that you're like, I'll go buy this thing because it's better, it's nicer, or whatever. But it's not because I think you'll think more of me. And that's not across the board.
Yeah.
But you go find those people that are operating on that wavelength and you start to play the game differently. And it's easier to win as a result. Because when you treat like wealth generation as just a game to be played for yourself, because it's a way of keeping score internally for you and like, oh, this is fun, and not because other people are going to look at your high score and be like, oh damn, look at him, he's so wealthy, that's awesome. Like it doesn't make you feel dirty to play the game. Like, and I think that's why a lot of people feel dirty about it, is because they inherently know their motivations for wanting to play it are based in other people's opinion of them. And so Marcus Aurelius, we're talking about him, right?
Yeah.
In Meditations, he says something. We care more about what others think of us than what we think of ourselves. And that's, I think, take money out of the equation, takes the status, whatever. That's the game. Is transitioning from a world status game is caring what other people think about you more than what you think of yourself. The wealth game is getting to a place where your opinion is the only one, like your opinion of yourself is the only one that really matters to you, which has nothing to do with money.
If I were to think about my opinion of myself, how do you, does that ever make you miserable, or like, do you find you're generally, yeah. Because for whatever reason, the voice in the head has such high standards.
Yeah.
And sometimes like, I ask myself, like, could I have done better today? And physiologically, I might not be able to, because if I do like a leg day hypertrophy training with my training coach, it's like sometimes I find myself I didn't mean to go to sleep. It's just that I found myself waking up.
Yeah.
You know, like, and plus you're supposed to eat all this freaking.
I can't eat that much chicken.
Yeah,
too much chicken.
all this chicken. It's like all I'm doing is like doing sets of 15 in the gym, and then you eat the chicken, and you're like, oh, I just woke, like, but then in the brain is like, you should have done something with those 2 hours.
Yeah.
You know, so like, I think sometimes I find myself playing the status game. One, because actually when you're a YouTuber, it pays a little bit. Like my followers think I'm cooler because I ride a motorcycle and drive a nice car. Not much. They don't think I'm that much cooler. Most people don't actually care that much, but some of them think I'm a little bit cooler.
100%.
And maybe they watch me more.
Yep.
And that actually leads to like financial gain. So almost like playing the status game makes you the business succeed more, because it's a superficial business on some level. Yeah. Even though I want to give it depth. And then the other thing is that like if I say, hey, we're not playing. Yeah.
But wait, but let's pause on that for a second. So what's your motivation in riding the motorcycle and whatnot? So that you can appear cool, and then some unknown subscriber is like, oh, he's cool, and then likes and subscribes, or is it as a medium for you to communicate your message?
I guess at first it was a mix of both. The reason I started this summer, I started flying planes, riding a motorcycle. I've been starting to, like, we had talked about at one point, like the James Bond tier list of skills to learn and how that would be cool. Totally. I sort of had we had both independently made this list before we even person. Yeah. We're the same person.
Yeah. I mean, we're like 20, 30-year-old men that want to be James Bond. It's totally normal. Nothing to see
This
here.
is a James Bond jacket from Quantum of Solace. Yep. So he's playing the status game too. You know? He's actually just full of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, this is what my mom used to say, is like, do what I say, not what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, these are ideals to uphold and to move towards, but it's never you never get to the top of the mountain. You just get to another peak, and then you look up and you go, oh shit, the mountain keeps going.
No, very true. Originally, the ambition was to give myself more proof of work, because as a YouTuber, you need a medium to tell a story. To be a good YouTuber, you need to be a good something else.
Yes.
And I was running out of that something else because I'd just gone full time on the channel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You have to do cool shit.
Yeah. So I created up these, but then I was like, I specifically chose these hobbies and not like knitting because it speaks to the niche I'm in.
Yeah.
But then I found myself enjoying.
Have you ever knit?
I've never knit.
So here's something that might surprise you. Yeah. Is that knitting is like a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yeah. And it's super archaic. Like if you get into knitting, I bet you could grow your YouTube channel way faster. 100%. The grandmas, so? Yeah, they're a voracious crowd. They consume voraciously. Yeah, don't ask me how I know.
The grandma just trying to build a good audience that can be loyal to me. If it has to be grandmas, I'll take it.
It's got to be grandmas. Yeah, I mean, you're doing okay if you're a demographic. Here's a funny thing: is my science fiction demographic skewed like 45, 50-year-old women.
Really?
Yeah. I thought it would, like, when I was writing, I thought it would skew like 20, 25-year-old men. No.
Why is that? Were your narratives like very romantic?
No, not at all. I'm like slightly autistic when it comes to like relationship stuff. Like, just ask my girlfriend. Like, there's no romance in my books. So don't know. You just never know who you're going to attract. But
has there been throughout your life a particular brand of woman who has been into you? Like this, or there's no patterns there. I'm curious if
definitely there is. So this is I attract caregivers because in my personal life, in like when I would go rock climbing, I would go on multi-day climbing trips, and I have such bad planning for things around like food and shelter that I would show up with flip-flops and a banana and a backpack full of climbing gear. And in my mind, I was like, this should be fine. I'm not hungry. If I'm not hungry at the moment, I can't conceive of a world in the future where I ever will be hungry. Therefore, I can't plan for it. Like I'm stupid like this. And so I attract a partner who's like, I need to take care of this guy. I need to keep you alive. Like that's my person.
That's the kind of partner you get.
Yeah, that's that. They're very caring.
It was Jordan Peterson who said like Beauty and the Beast is like the ultimate women's fantasy. Sorry.
The Beast.
Yeah, the Beast.
Going back to something you said before, I want to talk about this because that internal narrative that you're talking about, at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I could have done more, right?
Yeah.
Like it's your mind, where it's like socially acceptable to be our own biggest critic. Right. Nobody bats an eye at that, but it's not acceptable to be like your own biggest cheerleader. Right. Like if you start cheerleading for yourself, suddenly you're Trump. Right. Like he's like what happens when you go to like the megalomaniac, like far extreme of it.
Yeah.
But like if you can't be your biggest fan and your biggest cheerleader, then like, why is that wrong? And once you realize that there's nothing wrong with that, then as that cheerleader, or as that critic starts, doing what the critic does and is like, you're a slacker, you're a piece of shit. You slept until 7. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're never going to be anything because, the sun's already up. You missed your chance. You might as well just call it a day. Right. If you can like look at that and be like, and address it with grace towards yourself and compassion. Like if your best friend came to you and was like, man, I was just so tired. I conked out. I woke up at 7 and like, I kind of feel like shit. You'd probably be like, dude, it's okay. Like you're human. You just take another shot at tomorrow. Like get back on the horse. It's not a big deal. Like you worked hard. Like you're fine. If you could take that same mindset to yourself and show compassion and be like, hey, you know what? It's okay. Like you still got this. You did the best that you could. Now there are going to be days when you're like, fuck, I really did phone it in. I did not do my best. And I think you have to have like this, you have to be able to hold the dichotomy of simultaneously being a tyrant towards yourself and saying like, I'm going to drive myself harder than anybody else. But at the end of the day, also being willing to give yourself grace.
Oh, totally.
And people are okay with the one, okay, being the tyrant. Like it's not like acceptable to be gracious to yourself. I don't know why.
That is a great point. I feel like you are probably very harsh on yourself as well, though. Maybe you just have learned to manage that inner critic.
Yeah.
Over the years.
Yeah. I mean, nobody has a higher standard for yourself than you.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're like, my dad, which case like I can't live up to that standard.
Oh, see, this is the parallel of all great men is that we all had fathers who were just like, eh.
So let me tell you a story about my dad. This is when we talk about like my fiance leaving me, that's kind of like the start of a chapter.
Yeah.
The start of the first chapter was 8th grade. The day of the South Dakota State Chess Championship.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So I've been playing chess. I have severe ADHD. And growing up is really, really problematic. But my dad was military, so he wasn't home very often. But when he was home, we'd play chess together. And so it was this activity that we bonded over. And it was like I don't even think it was that meaningful to him in the grand scheme, but to me, for whatever reason, it was. And so like when I played chess, I could cut through the ADHD and I could focus, I could be there. And so I went to the South Dakota State Chess Championship, and my parents had just got divorced like a year before that. And my dad moved like 4 hours away. But every weekend he'd have custody and he would make the drive to pick up me and my sister every single weekend. And my dad's like kind of emotionally detached, kind of like I am in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And showing up was his way of showing love that I didn't understand for many, many years later, right? Just being there was how he showed love. But in the meantime, he seemed just disconnected. And he came that weekend for the chess championship. And I remember pulling up to the event and he lets me out of the car and he doesn't get out. And he's like, okay, I'll pick you up at 5 when it's over. And I was like, you're not coming in? And he's like, no, I'm going to take your sister and go get a Cinnabon.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, cool. And that hurt at the time, but it wasn't something that I was able to process in the moment. So I just went in there and I ended up winning the tournament. And I remember getting in the car at the end of the day and I had this big ass trophy I put in the back of the car and I get in and he looks at me and he goes, how'd you do? And I was like, I won. And he goes, good. You were supposed to.
Damn.
Yeah. And that was the chip on my shoulder for the next 15 years.
Damn.
Which was everything that you do, you're expected to win. If you don't win, you lost. So you never get points for winning because that's the expectation.
Yep.
You only ever lose points when you don't win. And so it's a game that ultimately will break you down and crush your soul, right? But it's the game that I played for the next 15 years. Everything that I did was in pursuit of, I'm supposed to be the best. It's just who I am. And it wasn't until I was finally able to like start reconceptualizing that concept and looking at it through a different lens, which was knowing my dad how I know him now. Like in later life, we've become friends and like we can have conversations about this. Like he never meant it in that way. He's just stupid. He's just a stupid guy that like says things in a stupid way and didn't think that like, oh, that could be misconstrued. But what he meant was good in the sense you were supposed to, of like, we knew you had the ability. You were the top ranked player going into this thing. You played up to your ability. That's to be expected. But what he was really asking is like, how did I perform? Like, did I do the best that I could? And the truth was I didn't in that tournament. I did not play to the best of my ability. I still was good enough to win. You know, sometimes you just get lucky. And once I understood and like had that breakthrough conversation with my dad later in life, it was like, man, if we could have had this 15 years ago, you would have saved me a lot of pain and a lot of like doing things for the sake of status, and the status being you're the best, right? And I think there's a lot of males and probably a lot of females out there, but I can speak to the males. I think a lot of us are programmed to think and play the game that way of like, if you're not the best, then what are you doing?
Oh wow, yeah, we are the same person, dude. This is totally why I play this. I mean, this is a big part of why I play the status game. Yeah, is my dad. But that's amazing that you were able to separate. This is maybe like this is a thing that happens to men in their 30s, like with the relationship with the dad, especially the disappointed dad. Like never, not disappointed, but just never impressed. Yeah. It's like you start to realize like, oh wow. It's like you were such a big part of the psychology, like this thing in the back of my head.
Dude, my dad was like my age now at that point in my life. And I think about like how if I had like a 13-year-old boy, like I would have fucked him up. Yeah. It would have been so bad.
It's so true.
You live long enough and you start to see like your parents as not the superheroes or the villains even, but that they're just broken people. Yeah, they're just trying to figure it out like you. And I think if you had a tough childhood, like you have to examine like what the reasons were behind it, you know, but in the same way that you have to be gracious with yourself, like be gracious with your parents too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like they're just humans doing the best they could.
Yeah. It is weird to think now, like a lot of the times where I found my dad like hard to us being strained, he was probably like 38 to 42. And I'm like, I'm not far away from that. No. And I will probably be as much of a dick at that that he is. So yeah.
And I mean, you came out all right.
Yeah.
Right? Like in the grand scheme of things, you got all your limbs, you got your mental faculties.
That's like, true, man.
Like you're still here. So we're still like here. Kudos to daddy.
We're now entering the final leg of the conversation. It has been a great one, but I guess I want to break it down to what are the three big principles, three big ideas, 3 to 5 that you would tell whatever speaks to you. I feel like you'll come up with this easily. Yeah. Maybe let's say 3 big ideas when you were starting out. Like, let's say we're sticking with the original origin story. Fiance calls it off. You're starting your journey. Like, I guess the 10-year journey to who you got to now. What are the 3 big things you wish he knew then, or like he ended up figuring out over the 10 years?
So the first one is piggybacking off the previous story, is that there is no best. There's just better, and better is a road that never ends. And I think when you look at skill acquisition or the wealth game or even the status game, if you want to play that one, like there is no person at the top. Like, who's the best human in the world? I don't know. Like, we don't even have a means for like identifying that. Yeah. What's it even mean to be the best Nikhil? Like, what's that look like? What does it mean to be the best Anthony? I don't know, but I can be better, and I can measure that, because all I have to do is look back to yesterday and be like, am I better than I was yesterday in any way, any way, shape or form? Can I point to progress? Yeah. And when you do that, I think that takes a lot of the burden off of trying to live up to a standard that you will never obtain. Because Maslow, he had this framework, which I found really, really interesting. He called it the +1 framework, or maybe that's what I call it. So Abraham, you're welcome. He said, imagine that you're standing on a road, and in front of you, the road twists and it turns and it goes off into the distance and off the horizon. But at equal distances, there's these road signs, and all of them say +1, +1, +1, +1. And if you were to turn around, there's the same road. It's going away from you into the distance, but all the signs, they say -1, -1, -1. Now, if you imagine like your perfect, ideal, best self, then every moment in life, when you had a decision to make that would either move you forward or move you backwards in life, your ideal self would always make the right choice and always be moving forward, never moving backwards. But we're human, and so we make mistakes. And sometimes we make a decision that moves us back one, which costs us the opportunity of having gone forward one. So in fact, we're now 2 behind our ideal self. So the game is rigged from the beginning. You'll never catch yourself. All you can do, and it doesn't even really matter because you're never going to catch the horizon. All that really matters is, how do you answer the next decision? How do you answer it? Does it move you forward or does it move you backwards? And that could be as small as like, did I get my sleep in today? Did I get my rest, my recovery? Did I get my water? Did I tell somebody I love them? Did I make a genuine connection? Did I try hard? Right? Like you get to make the game for yourself, and you can rig it in whatever way you want, but try to just make as many +1 decisions as you can. So that's number 2. Number 3 is understanding that there's a fundamental difference between the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment. And this is something that took me a really, really long time. And like, if I had figured this out sooner, but again, I'm slow, took me till I was in my 30s. So the science of achievement is like, when it comes to chess, when it comes to business, when it comes to real estate or YouTube, like there's a process, right? You can teach somebody, I can teach you how to make a YouTube channel that will have 100,000 listeners or subscribers in a year, right? Like just follow this framework.
Totally.
It's a science. You can teach it to anybody. But fulfillment is an art because it's different for everybody, and it's a moving target. And so how you answer it to ultimately be fulfilled is going to be very independent. You can't read a book. I can't teach you how to do it. I can gesticulate wildly towards, something that might move you in the right direction, but it might be completely wrong. And the mistake that I was making for so long, and I still do, don't get me wrong, is that achievement is not, you cannot ever fill that hole inside of you with achievement, because fulfillment implies that you're not filled, right? There's just a hole, not fulfilled. Right. And if you think about these things as 2 different mediums, right? Fulfillment is the asphalt on the road, but there's a pothole. And achievement is a bowl of ramen noodles. I can take that ramen noodle, I can put it in the pothole. I have filled it, but I have not filled it with a material that is going to make this whole, right? And that's the mistake, is like, we think, oh, if I just achieve this thing, you're just pouring more ramen in the potholes. And you're not addressing the underlying issue, which is that your asphalt's busted. Right? And how you fix your asphalt is going to be different than how I fix mine. But it's the most important thing that you have to figure out, because it's what life's about. But before you can do that, you got to have money, right? Like when I was living in the back of that van, I wasn't worried about things like fulfillment. I was like, I need to get out of this van. I need to have money so I can eat, and I have a place to live, and I don't feel scared at night that the hobos are going to break my window and take my home and meet with them. So you have to figure out how to win the money game first, and then you can start really focusing on the fulfillment.
You're so efficient with your words. All that writing, it paid off, man. Like you just get these great ideas out there.
Oh, thank you.
The YouTube scripts are going to be easy.
Oh, perfect.
This has been episode 15 of the podcast with Anthony. If you liked Anthony as I did, I think he's a great speaker, great guy with thoughts and ideas. He's got his own channel. It's going to in the description box. Also, it's going to show up in a banner right now on the screen in front of his face. He also has an Instagram, Anthony Vicino, the Anthony Vicino.
Yeah. You know what's really funny about that?
Yeah.
Can I tell you? So I had this other account. That was the original Anthony Vicino.
Oh,
and then I tried to switch the name at some point. I don't remember why. And Instagram was like, oh, you lost it. Somebody else has it now.
Oh, dang.
I was like, what? And the last, I tried to do it in 5 minutes, and they're like, nope, somebody else has it. Like, so whoever you are,
you've
Anthony
taken my
Vicino,
name.
you've taken my name. I'm coming for you.
Oh, how do you say your name? Vicino?
Vicino.
Vicino.
Yeah, if you want to say it the Italian way, do you want to say it the Italian way?
I do, man.
Okay. So first you got to prepare your hand. Yeah. Vicino.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Vicino.
Vicino.
Yeah.
Hey, subscribe to the guys. Subscribe to Captain Sinbad. The podcast can be found everywhere podcasts are found. Listen, play the money game. Maybe don't play the status game unless your dad was mean to you, in which case I say freaking go full send. Play that status game. Greatness is coming, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for coming on, man.